Hello everyone, Max here with Fiction Rant to bring you another React video, this time to a whole new channel and a whole new kind of matchup, so this definitely should be interesting. Also, I have a coffee and fourth wall links in the description if you want to support the channel, and I just introduced a fun new mug to the merch store that you can see on screen here, so if you want to get one of those for yourself, check out the store. Alright, on to the video. Basically, one of my commenters pointed me towards this matchup, complaining that Gamza, the content creator, is totally being unfair and off base, etc., so I decided to give it a look myself. Now, in fairness, I'm far less familiar with 40k than I am with Star Trek or Star Wars, but I do know enough for government work, and I have a strong sense of fair play, so without further ado, here's why Star Trek ships stomps Warhammer 40k ships by Gamza, and thanks so much for the suggestion.
Why, hello there everybody, welcome to this video. So today, we're going to be talking about Star Trek versus Warhammer 40k once again, and today we're going to be talking specifically about the ships. And those ships are going to be for Star Trek, just your standard run-of-the-mill Miranda class ship versus an Emperor class ship from Warhammer 40k. But
okay, so he is very intentionally stacking the deck here. Basically, the Miranda is not a particularly powerful ship. Depending on the era you're talking about, it has been a workhorse for literally decades with, refits, but not a ton of changes. And then the battleship is, of course, a top-of-the-line behemoth of a ship. So he's intentionally setting this up as, okay, if I pit the worst ship that Starfleet has versus the best that Imperium has, it's still not a fair fight against the Imperium. So that's his framing here.
first, I gotta give a shout out to one of the patrons like I do every video. You guys are interested, go ahead and jump on board. But today's shout out is gonna be Paul Stevens. Thank you, my good man, for everything. Now let's get back to the video. All right, let's go ahead and begin with this one. And that is what Buttermilk Bob would normally say. Damn you, Gamza. Oh, Warhammer 40k ships are enormous. They're floating cities. They automatically win against that puny little flying saucer. You are going to see arguments like this all the time. It's absolutely hilarious and it's very entertaining. So if you guys...
So I agree with him that arguments like that are hilarious. Scale doesn't mean good. Not necessarily. Sometimes it can. Like if you have a gigantic weapon that requires a gigantic ship, then yes, scale is good. If, however, you can pack similar energy into a much smaller ship, that's better. Generally speaking, unless you absolutely have to, bigger is worse in warfare. Partially because it just makes you a bigger target, but also just it's a testament to the level of technology that you have. Think of, in Star Wars, the Death Star can take out a planet, but it's also the size of a small moon. That's not actually a flex in terms of strength. Like, you could just drop rocks and do the exact same thing, just redirect a few comets and you do the same thing, but no, they wanted to build a whole station. The Sun Crusher, that is a flex. Taking out a star with something that's a little bigger than a shuttle, that's impressive. So, yeah, scale is a little weird like that. Bigger isn't necessarily better, and it's often worse.
Have those comments, go ahead and leave them down below. However, I'll explain it to you this way. If people kind of go with the idea that a bigger ship automatically means that you win, not the case at all. Let me tell you about the tragic story of a giant warship called the Yamato. If anybody out here isn't familiar with this one, it was one of the biggest naval ships in history. And you guys want to know where it's at right now? At the bottom of the ocean. Why? Because it was just too big, too dumb, and it got bombed to death by little miniature planes. It couldn't even defend itself.
So yeah, he's making a really good point here that the Yamato class battleships that the Japanese used during World War II were absolutely top of the line, best things ever in terms of battleship warfare, but they got sunk anyway, and really they could have built multiple ships that were smaller and more effective in general for the same price and done much better. A really good another example from World War II is the Mouse tank. Oh yes, we made this ridiculously gigantic tank that can take on anything, so they basically never actually saw combat because you just don't engage them. Why would you? And then they break down on their own, and then you don't have to bother with them at all. In the case of the Yamato, it is sunk by a bunch of aircraft because ships are notoriously bad at defending themselves against aircraft. So yeah, he's got a really good point here.
So that's one of the things that you need to look at here when it comes to just size alone. Now, why would I bring up something like the Yamato, right? I mean, that's a naval ship. We're talking about Warhammer 40k, and these ships they're huge, they're massive, they're in space. However, when you look at Games Workshop's official lore behind their ships, they have been specifically designed to fight like old naval ships. Okay, we're talking from 18th century all the way up to like World War I. Now, you will find that this fact escapes a lot of your more casual fans. Not everybody, of course. But when it comes to Warhammer 40k in space, the ships are particularly extraordinarily slow, very cumbersome, because again, the rules, the designs, everything about them has been based around 18th century ships, World War I, World War II, giant monolithic ships just blasting each other apart with broadsides.
And he's totally right. Yeah, these are set up with broadside in mind. Most of their weapons are focused sideways. You can even see in this image, there are some weapons pointed forward, but the vast majority are not. In fact, that front area, I believe, is extra armored for ramming maneuvers, which means you can't put weapons there because you need armor. So he's totally right about that, and about them being very cumbersome. I think inertial dampers are a thing in 40k. I think they must be. But so one of the things that Star Trek is able to do is I think it's the drive coils will actually artificially reduce the mass of the ship itself, making them artificially more nimble. I don't think that at least the Imperium has anything equivalent to that, which just ultimately amounts to, even if they were to use something like that to cut the mass of their ship in half, that's still a lot of inertia, and you just cannot turn something like that all that fast, which means if you're against a nimble opponent and most of your weapons are pointed sideways, they can stay out of the way of them.
And then it specifically mentions that when it comes to being in space and maneuvering this ship, it can take minutes to just try to turn this ship around because it's so big and cumbersome. And the idea is that these are just floating fortresses with massive void shields. And then when they finally line up a broadside, they just blast you with everything that they've got. And even if you're to look at the game Battlefleet Gothic Armada, you will notice that the game mechanics have actually been particularly sped up so that way you can actually play the game, because if it was truly lore accurate of what Games Workshop has made for their own ships, you'd probably be sitting there for hours. It would take forever to turn or do anything really. So you might as well say that Battlefleet Gothic Armada is just Warhammer 40k ship battles on fast forward, so you can actually play the damn game.
That's actually a really good reason why I don't use video games as reference material unless I absolutely have to, because they're gamified to make them entertaining. Nobody wants to play a video game where it's like, oh, I did one pass, let me spend 5 minutes turning. No, you want to turn in 4 seconds and keep firing. Game logic also leads to things like real-time strategy games where it's like, oh yeah, I can just dump minerals into my refinery and then create fully crewed tanks and stuff in my war factory. Well, where did the people come from? Did you dig them up? There is no like convoys of troops showing up, reinforcements or anything like that, but it makes the game work, so it's okay. So yeah, very good point that game logic doesn't really reflect reality. Well, the fiction of it, I guess. Reality's, we're talking about total fiction here.
And that does make a little bit of sense though too, because you figure these Emperor class battleships, they range from anywhere from about probably like 9 to 11 to 12 kilometers. They're very big ships. They are just floating cities at this point.
Yeah, for perspective, a Imperial Star Destroyer, which is I think a little over twice as big as a Galaxy class starship. So the Galaxy class is like 600 meters long. They're really wide too, but we won't get into that. A Star Destroyer is 1,600 meters long, and he's talking like 12 kilometers long. These are behemoths of ships.
Now, when it comes to ships like from Star Trek, I'm using the Miranda class, which is nothing spectacular. It's just kind of like your standard workhorse, if you will, for Star Trek in the Federation.
Yeah, that's fine, Gamza, but exactly how fast does this Star Trek ship even go? Blah.
All right, so for the Miranda class ship, you're looking at warp 9 to warp 9.2. Now, what does this mean? Does it mean it's flying through the Imperium like the Warhammer 40k ship? No, completely different. This type of warp goes through subspace. And what we're talking about here...
So that's not how warp drive works. You do not go through subspace. You are warping space-time. Very different. I I won't get into the whole mechanics of it, but it's also a little weird that he's talking about warp drive here because he hasn't talked about 40k warp drive. They do behave completely different. Basically, 40k faster than light travel is you go through hell, the warp, and then you emerge at your destination, and it's like a shortcut. Warp drive from Trek is you're actually warping space-time, so you never actually leave real space, which means you can still interact and see real space, which has a lot of advantages. But combat isn't usually conducted at warp, so I'm not sure where he's going with this.
There is roughly close to 1,700 times the speed of light. Now, the reason why I give you its maximum speed on this point is because this is also how fast it can fight as well.
Can, technically, yes. Torpedoes can be fired at warp. Some phasers can. Do, pretty much never.
So at these maximum speeds, it can fire torpedoes, phasers, all that other stuff. It can also drop out of warp and do its all little flip-flop maneuvers, like it's like a minnow in the water, you know, just flying and flipping all over the place. It can do that as well.
Yes, they are quite nimble, and the part that he's not mentioning here, or at least hasn't yet, is that full impulse is a quarter the speed of light, which is quite quick, and they can reach that in some indeterminate amount of time, but it's implied to be like seconds to minutes. They can get to that kind of speed, which is where the drive coils, artificially reducing the mass of the ship, help a lot.
So we can see that there is a significant speed difference. Now, does this mean...
He didn't talk about the speed. Oh, he talked about how they're slow and lumbering and take multiple minutes to turn. Okay. Yeah, so he's conflating faster than light and sublight speeds. He's doing the annoying thing where he's comparing apples and oranges, except that he's still right. Like, the two types of speed that he's talking about have nothing to do with each other, so I don't know why he's even comparing them like that, but... He's right that the Miranda class is way more maneuverable at sublight, and their faster than light is also a lot more versatile and a lot less hazardous.
That the Star Trek ship just automatically blows up the Warhammer 40k ship? No, of course not. It doesn't mean that at all. It just simply means that it's faster. It makes sense too, because when you look at the crew sizes, they're significantly different. When you look...
Crew size has nothing to do with speed, like, at all. A speedboat has a Missouri or a aircraft carrier, a modern aircraft carrier. Let's say they can pull 40 knots in a pinch. A clipper ship will never be able to pull 40 knots ever, and the aircraft carrier has many times the crew complement of a clipper ship. Those have nothing to do with each other. It's all about the tech that you're using.
Look at the Emperor class ship. I mean, it can hold hundreds of thousands of bodies. Sometimes people even can report that it can hold up to like 1 million people. I wouldn't be surprised that a lot of people can just be crammed onto a ship like that. When you look at a Miranda class ship, I mean, it's only holding a max of roughly like 400 to 500 people. So there's probably more cooks on the damn Imperial ship than there are crew members in the entirety of a Miranda class ship. All right, let's go ahead and talk about...
Yeah, so crew complement has nothing to do with anything unless you're actually doing boarding actions. As long as the ships operate with whatever crew they have, who cares?
Weapons now, because I think that's everybody's favorite, but I'm going to be a bit brief on this because you could probably just make an entire dedicated video to how many damn weapons is on an Emperor class ship. So you got things like macro cannons, where you're basically just firing buildings at your enemy. You've got laser batteries, lance arrays, you've got torpedoes and stuff, from being able to crack a planet to exterminatus to blowing ships out of the sky. I mean, you basically got everything covered for the most part. But the vast majority of all these weapons is set on the broadside of the ship, because as I said before, it's like 18th century ship battles. You just line yourself up with the broadside and just blast the shit out of each other. And I mean, at this point, it's like two gorillas with a club just beating the shit out of each other. And I guess whichever...
Sorry for the profanity. Not that anyone in my audience probably cares. Yeah, he's right that the Imperium ships are pretty much just, let's go broadside and pummel each other. That's how that works.
One has more stamina wins. All right, now back to the Miranda class. What kind of weapons are we talking about here? Well, on average, you're talking about like Type 7 phaser banks. You've got torpedo launchers and phaser cannons, and that's pretty much it. That's about what you're going to get with it. Now, is it capable of destroying a planet? Yeah, sure, it is. It would definitely take more concentrated fire, probably more strategic fire, to do something like that. But these are not really warships. They're not designed to do that. This is like an explorers, scientist kind of ship thing going on here. These are not battleships in the sense of an Emperor class ship is. I could already...
So, yeah. He's right that they're not warships. Trek, until the Defiant class, didn't really make warships. But that doesn't mean that they're not quite capable. They are exploration vessels and defense vessels. They are quite capable of holding their own and have done so against very militaristic factions like the Klingons and Romulans, which actually do and always have built warships. And yet they really struggled to do anything to the Federation that was particularly meaningful. So, yes, they don't build warships, but it's kind of one of those situations.
Hear the buttermilk pop right now. Oh, please. What a shitty ship, man. You could barely even destroy a planet. That's just Tuesday for Warhammer 40k. How on earth will that ship ever even fight against an Emperor-class battleship? So, calm down. We'll get to that. But first, let's cover the shields. Alright, now when it comes to Warhammer 40k and your Emperor-class battleship, you've got void shields. These bad boys come in multiple layers, so while you're trying to pop one layer, the other shields are beginning to regenerate as the other ones are stopping you. So let's say you've got 6 or 12 layers of void shields. You pop the first 2, well, those 2 are now starting to regenerate, and eventually they'll be back online, but the other shields are still holding. So you have to basically dig through a bunch of shields before you can actually start damaging the ship. And that's if you can damage it, because you're talking about a ton of armor on these giant monstrosity city-sized ships.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, particularly the front is armored because they actually employ ramming maneuvers, which is in space just totally insane. And he's right, the void shields are layered, they are very powerful for defending. I think they're more effective against projectiles rather than energy. But I think basically the way they work is whenever anything hits them, they get teleported into... Basically, instead of hitting the ship, they get teleported into the warp, where it can just go off harmlessly. Unclear exactly how much damage they can absorb, but as he was saying, the shields are layered, so if they start failing, others will pick up the slack, while the ones that are damaged regenerate, and they can keep that up for a very long time.
Now, as for the Miranda class ship, you are looking at a single giant bubble that encompasses the ship.
That's nice, Gamza, but how much damage does it take before that shield drops?
Well, it's actually about 500 megatons to drop.
Okay, I have no idea where he references that from. I've never been able to find something so definitive, and that also begs the question of, okay, in what era? And 500 megatons of what? And also distributed over how much area, because like Trek ship shields are sectional, so it's like, okay, if you direct 500 megatons into a 1 meter square, will that drop the shields? Well, what about if it's distributed across the entire surface of the ship? I don't know where he's getting this information from, but there's nuance there that's pretty important, and yeah, that is a very dubious claim in my opinion.
Drop that shield, give or take, depending on the era that you really want to use for this ship, since it's been in use for quite a long time. Alright, so let's go ahead and take these ships and slap them against each other and see exactly what happens. Now, first and foremost, a lot of times where you're going to get errors in these types of battles is people start going up against, okay, what ship is this, and then what ship is that, what weapons does it have, and what weapons does this one have, and they have like this weird idea that these ships are just standing in front of each other doing nothing, just blasting the shit out of each other, and it's like, okay, that is definitely 40k brain right there, because that's what 40k ships do. They just stand there like doofuses, just blasting the shit out of each other because they're super slow. That's how they've been designed to fight.
Yeah, I've absolutely had essentially that conversation in my comment sections before. Basically, that kind of thing. Okay, if you built a really nimble ship and then you sit there and do a slugging match, that's assuming that the commander of the nimble ship is an idiot. Don't assume that the people are idiots. Assume that they're at least somewhat competent. Then go forward. So yeah, if you have a really nimble ship that can maneuver and stay out of firing arcs, let them do so.
Star Trek ships are not designed, I would even say the vast majority of other sci-fi ships are not designed to fight this way. They fight on the move, They're doing dodge maneuvers all the time. Even in Star Trek, it's always like, what in tarnation, they're firing it on our ship. Go ahead and use evasive maneuvers.
Yeah, like every single combat encounter, they always talk about, okay, evasive pattern, such and such.
So think about it logically. Why on earth would a Star Trek ship pull up to the broadside of a Warhammer 40k class ship and just let it blast all of its weapons into it? That doesn't make sense. Now, I will agree with you, okay? If a Star Trek ship just sat there dead in the water, not even trying to do anything and was like, let's go toe to toe, yeah, I'd say it most likely is going to lose. If not, it's going to die in the process of also killing the Warhammer 40k ship.
Oh, damn you, Gamza, how could you say that?
Well, let's get to it. So yes, if both ships were standing toe to toe, trying to puff their chests out, they'd likely just destroy each other, is the way that this would realistically go. However, with a Star Trek ship, they have beam technology, okay? They can teleport things into other people's ships. They can also teleport things out of their ships as well. Now, I know exactly what you're thinking.
Damn you, Gamza, void shield, stop that altogether.
Actually, you would be incorrect on this one. So, void shields specifically are blocking warp-based technology. Whenever you think about Warhammer 40k, its teleportation devices are almost always warp-based. Not entirely, but most of the part. Like, let's say Terminators. If you're going to teleport onto a ship and they've got void shields on, you can't teleport. Why? Because it's warped-based. Just like
Yeah, so they block warp-based teleportation tech, stuff like that. They also block conventional munitions, which is an important thing to point out. But yeah, them blocking only stuff that has to do with the warp makes perfect sense.
like the void shield is also warped based, so it's blocking like that warp. However, Star Trek doesn't use the warp. It uses a different type of dimension called subspace. So
Yeah, that's not how transporters work either. They don't work through subspace. It's just a matter stream. They operate in real space. But in any case, what his point is that transporters should work directly through void shields. And I actually kind of agree with him. I think that would absolutely work.
void shields are not built to stop that at all. So you could literally take a transporter and teleport a photon torpedo.
Wait, hang on. I did just say that void shields will stop conventional munitions, so it's possible that they would interfere with a matter stream from a transporter. It would be basically like blocking any other kind of munition. So, for the sake of argument, let's say that he's right and transporters would totally bypass void shields, but come to think of it, it's probably actually kind of dubious that they would do so.
Literally right into their engine room, onto the bridge, really wherever you wanted to. Or you could lock onto their life sign signatures and beam them out into outer space if you really wanted to be that way. So if you...
Yeah, the 100,000 people would take a very long time to beam out. But beaming things like torpedoes into the engine room, yeah, that should work fine.
you really think about this, 40K doesn't have the flexibility nor the technology to keep up with Star Trek. Then you combine this with the sheer ability to outmaneuver Warhammer 40K ships, they're never going to have a chance to fire. That's exactly why I brought up that battleship.
Whoa. So Star Trek gets to use their transporters, but Warhammer 40K doesn't? He just talked about the Terminators and their ability to teleport. A squad of Terminators aboard a Federation starship would just wreak havoc. I mean, they'd probably be able to do something like lock onto them and beam them back out into space or whatever, but then they can just beam back in, so you'd end up with this weird ping pong thing. I guess that ultimately you'd have to like transport them out and take their suits off mid-transit or something like that, so they can't keep doing that, which is absolutely something that transporters can do. But yeah, don't just ignore the fact that 40K can do that same thing. They're also quite accustomed to dealing with pretty advanced tech, so it's entirely possible that they'd be able to just equip all their Terminators or whatever with some kind of scrambler that makes them impossible to lock on with a transporter. Or just beam transport directly to the transporter room of the ship and disable that first. That would make sense. But, okay.
Yamato, because that was one of the things that it also ran into as well. It was too big, too slow and cumbersome, and it got bombed to death by a bunch of small fighters. Now, those small fighters, roughly you're looking at the same technological advancements on both sides. When you're looking at Star Trek versus Warhammer 40K, People might not quite understand this, but I'll say it here. It is orders of magnitude beyond Warhammer 40k technology.
Sort of. A lot of stuff from Star Trek is essentially what the Imperium was prior to the Dark Age of Technology collapse, essentially. Well, I guess during the Dark Age of Technology. So they have a lot of really advanced tech that the Imperium is kind of lost at this point, and they're kind of only really rediscovering. That's where I'd put, like, original series Trek. They've certainly eclipsed that now in the later seasons and such, but yeah, it's not worlds different. It's like World War II tech versus modern tech. It's different, but still effective against each other.
When it comes to, like, let's say teleporting in Warhammer 40k, that's like a big deal. Teleporting Terminators into something. On Star Trek, it's literally just, it's like an elevator. It's not even anything special at all.
He is right about that. The availability of insanely powerful tech is just insane in Star Trek.
So realistically speaking, even this is, we're not even talking about anything special. A Miranda class ship in Star Trek is technically, it's old technology. It's nothing special at all. It's not specifically designed for war. I mean, it was when it first came out.
No, it wasn't. He's showing the Reliant right here. That's the ship that Khan took over. Yeah, they're not warships.
But then they started reclassifying all of these into like different types of ships. But when it comes to like battleships, they don't even count as that any longer because they're old ships that are just basically workhorses at this point. Yet it possesses all this technology that is significantly faster and way more advanced than anything the Imperium of Man has. I would be willing to argue that a single Miranda-class ship would be able to wipe out a massive fleet of Emperor-class ships. What could they possibly do against a ship that can fight at like 10 times the speed that they can probably even scan at, let alone see and fire at?
Okay, so that, no. If you want a good example of the kind of tech gap that you're talking about, look at the Necrons versus the Imperium. Necron ships are definitely way better than Imperium ships technologically. The gap in technology is probably even bigger than that between the Federation and the Imperium. But the Imperium can still take them on. It's not a super fair fight, but the Necrons still managed to get taken out by Imperium. That's the kind of situation you're looking at. They can absolutely be overwhelmed. He keeps conflating that so let's just talk about the warping, fighting while at warp. Yes, they could do a bunch of flybys shooting torpedoes, but the amount of damage that they'd be able to do per pass wouldn't be enough to actually overwhelm Void Shield. So they'd have to drop out of warp in order to actually continuously do more damage. And as soon as they do that, then you get into the issues of, okay, if you want to use your transporters, you have to drop your shields. Well, the Imperium ship has really big, Lancer energy lances that'll punch holes in your ship, so maybe don't do that. You can stay back and fire phasers and torpedoes from a distance while the Imperium ship has a really hard time retaliating. You could probably keep that up forever, but you probably wouldn't actually do enough damage to drop the shields on the battleship, so it would just be a war of attrition that neither side wins until the Federation ship runs out of ammo and leaves. Or, if you involve the transporters thing, that gets into, well, yes, but both sides can do that. And you get a few Terminators teleporting into, the bridge and murdering bridge crew and stuff with their ridiculous weapons and blasting holes and stuff. You do that a few times, and the Federation ship is in big trouble. On the flip side, if torpedoes are being beamed into the Imperium reactors and stuff, that might actually just one-shot the ship. So I'm not really sure who would actually come out ahead on that. I'm inclined to think that as soon as teleportation gets involved, both sides just lose. But in terms of conventional warfare, actually firing weapons, I don't think either side can really win this. The battleship is just too beefy, and The Miranda class is too underpowered, and the amount of damage that that either side can really do to each other is pretty limited.
You're not going to be touching this ship. It's going to be zipping and zooming around the battlefield. You're taking minutes just to turn your ship. Dude, they've already blown you up and left the whole sector. Imagine an 18th century ship versus a modern day jet fighter. That's essentially what you're looking at here. You probably won't even see the thing coming, and you're going to get blown up out of the water. And as I said before, the Star Trek technology is significantly not only more advanced, but way more flexible as well. 40K prizes itself on saying that humanity is basically dead in the water. They're stagnant. They don't innovate any longer. Star Trek is literally the complete opposite. It's nothing but innovation. Their technology is so silly, it's basically like space magic at this point.
So he's right about all of that. It's a little unfair to bring it up, honestly, in a comparison, because mid-combat, you're not innovating, really. So, oh, man, this Imperium guardsman's a jerk, just shooting his buddy right in the middle of the spine there. Friendly fire, no. So yeah, if you're in a wartime setting, yes, innovation matters. Mid-battle, not really.
You know, like time travel, is that supposed to be a big deal? Like, you know, like they talk about Necrons and like, ooh, they have, you know, technology that can manipulate time. Dude, literally, that's a filler episode in Star Trek. Nobody cares about time manipulation or anything else like that. It's literally...
Yes, they do. There's literally a temporal prime directive. It's a big deal. Yes, it's, you know, this is the Saturday morning episode or whatever, but time travel's a big deal in Trek.
Just a filler episode in Star Trek. Nobody cares. It's just blah, blah, blah. Now, but again, this is why I'm bringing up, like, the battleship Yamato. It's like,
My ship is just so much bigger, Gamza. It holds like 1 million people.
it's like, dude, you know what that means? Instead of it being like triple kill, it'll just be like 1 million kill. Yeah, my ship is gonna fly past you at this, like, faster than the speed of light. Teleport like 5 photon torpedoes into your ship, fly off, and you're gonna be like, what's this? And then it's just gonna blow up your entire ship. Who cares?
Assuming they can actually operate transporters while at warp like that, that probably would actually be a perfectly viable strategy. Assuming that the transporters can penetrate void shields, which I kind of doubt, honestly. Whether warp-based teleportation could actually penetrate Federation shields is a different matter. I'm inclined to actually think they probably could, because it's interdimensional travel, and they, you know, once they've seen it a couple times, they could adapt their shields to block it. But the first time, probably not.
Like, there's nothing, you can't even turn fast enough to look at the ship, let alone fire at it. All right, so here's your conclusion. Are Warhammer 40K ships cool? Yes, Warhammer 40K ships are cool. Are they powerful? Like most things in Warhammer 40K, it's powerful in Warhammer 40K. The second something from the outside steps in, or it steps out of its own element and goes to another universe, it's almost always game over.
Yeah, so that's actually... I need to do more Warhammer 40k content. Based on what I keep learning about it, the reason why 40k always wins is a bit of a meme, is not because they have the best of really anything most of the time. It's because of scale. It's like, okay, can Master Chief from Halo take on a normal Astartes? Probably. Can he take on 50? No. Can a Miranda class take on a battleship in this case? Maybe. Can the Federation survive an invasion by the entire Imperium? Probably not, because, you know, planets exist and they can just take out all of those if they want to. So, the scale of 40k is so absurd that it makes beating them in full-on war just basically impossible. Keep in mind that in 40k, the Imperium of Man, you know, you hear about, okay, there's the Orcs, the Eldar, the Necrons, the Dark Eldar, all these different, the Tau, all these different factions. The Imperium is fighting all of them at the same time and mostly winning. That's the kind of scale you're talking about. You have all these groups that are crazy, insanely powerful, and the Imperium is fighting all of them. That's why it's the meme.
Because remember, when you're looking at things from the lens of Warhammer 40k, it looks big, bad, and tough. When you're looking at it from the lens of, like, let's say the Star Trek universe, I mean, you probably got the Federation thinking, like, the ship is moving so fast, it's probably thinking to itself, oh, its engines must be burnt out or something, like, it must be stranded in the water. Maybe we should go give them aid or some shit, because it's getting to the point where it's like, dude, this ship, it can't even turn fast enough to look at us, let alone shoot at us. It's like, it's preposterous to me that people could even assume that 40k ships are just gonna blow Star Trek out of the water. It's insane. There's like zero logic to it.
My ship bigger, weapons bigger too, therefore I win.
It's the exact same brain as the people that built the Yamato.
Okay, so yeah, basically his whole premise here is... the thing is, he's right about a lot of stuff. Bigger isn't always better. In fact, it's often worse. I don't care how big your gun is if it can't hit anything. Very good points. He then proceeds to use the transporter trump card and ignore the fact that Warhammer can do kind of the same thing, and in this circumstance, possibly even better. So it's just... as I said in the beginning, I have a very strong sense of fairness and fair play, and with a matchup like this, it's just like, okay, at least represent each side honestly when you're doing this kind of matchup. Don't just give one side... He even talked about the fact that Terminator armor can teleport and then just didn't factor that in. What the heck? All right, well, those are my thoughts. Let me know in the comments anything that you would like to add. If you think that he's totally right, if you think that there's some other X factor that we're not considering here. Again, check out the merch store and the coffee if you want to support the channel. And until next time, live long and prosper, and may the Force be with you.